Welcome back to the Upper Hand Fantasy Podcast. I'm Faraz and Zach. I'm here with Zach Rizzuto. We are going over 2024 fantasy football strategy. We're going to go over it all. All the strategies. Zero running back, hero running back, late round quarterback. Not really, because most likely I'm not taking a late round quarterback. Late round tight ends? Not really. Early round tight ends is probably where it's at. Mid round tight ends? Maybe one or two guys. We'll see. But hero running back, zero running back, robust running back. Usually these strategies involve the running back position, right? We'll also talk about, if you do go robust running back, which of the wide receivers are you happy with in the middle rounds, right? Like we'll be going going over all of that, why we take scrambling quarterbacks, why we want to aim for those guys, and there might be one scrambling quarterback that we look at in later rounds, round 10, 11-ish, that might be available, and why I'm okay with him being my QB1 if I don't grab a quarterback early, okay? So we're going to be talking about it all. And by the way, our season-long draft kit is almost here. We're putting the final touches on it, and you'll be getting that very shortly. It'll be available at upperhandfantasy.com. You can sign up today. Our 2024 rankings are already up, okay? So the main piece of this is up there. You'll get access to all the player preview blurbs for the 2024 season, our targets and avoids, and so much more, including trade charts. That starts in week 1. This will include weekly rankings as well going into the season for all of our in-season stuff that we're offering. So go check it out at upperhandfantasy.com. Stay tuned for our official release. We're kind of slow rolling this at this point, but go check it out, upperhandfantasy.com. Now, Zach, we start getting into the strategy of things. I'm pretty free-flowing during drafts. I think it's worth understanding, though, who will be available that you will be happy with at their ADPs so you can adjust early, right? Obviously, you want to do those mock drafts, but you want to know which guys are available, like between round 6 and 10, right? Guys who you can draft a little bit later who you have kind of no problem starting in week 1 if you have to. For example, if I think Deontay Johnson is a solid PPR wide receiver 3, he's going in the 40s, right, among wide receivers, and I can get him in the 8th round on Sleeper. Or if I'm happy with Hollywood Brown or Calvin Ridley as my wide receiver 3, which I think I am, they're both going in the 7th round. So even though you're kind of risking them not being there, at least you have a couple options in case one of them gets sniped early and you feel more confident to take other positions early, like taking that tight end or quarterback in the first 6 rounds and maybe not feel the pressure to grab 3 wide receivers before you reach the 6th round, right? Or maybe you choose to go robust running back instead, right? And you end up grabbing, several running backs in the early rounds. You want to try and identify the mid-round guys who can be starters for you so you can understand how flexible or not flexible you can be in the first several rounds, right? Raheem Mostert, for example, right? He's going later, but you have no problem starting him in week 1, right? So understanding which of those guys are available in the later rounds so you can easily plug them in week 1 so you can be a little bit more flexible as you start your drafts.
Right, and that flexibility is what gives me the most comfort when I'm drafting. You know what I mean? I don't feel like I have to reach on a certain position. And is there a worse feeling when you know you're reaching on a position in a draft? Like, okay, I didn't take my quarterback, but here we're at the end of the tier of quarterbacks. Like you're at the end of tier 2 for quarterbacks. You're like, I have to take one. I hate that feeling, and allowing yourself that flexibility. To get that flexibility, you need to know the guys that are going later, like you just mentioned. So definitely keeping an eye on that. For, like you personally, you say you're free flowing. That pretty much means that you're happy to let the board fall to you. I'm the exact same way. I don't ever want to feel like I'm in a situation where I'm not getting a deal in the draft. Even though you draft high, the first 6, 7 rounds, obviously they're all going to be pretty good picks. You still want to be maximizing the value that you're getting from them, and knowing where players are going, specifically on different platforms, like you mentioned, is a huge part of that. And that's what's going to make you comfortable in your draft.
100%. And, it's still worth, even though we're free flowing, it's still worth knowing these strategies. Why? Because you could end up with one of these strategies in your draft. Like, for example, let's say you're 4 rounds in and you have one running back. Well, guess what? If you drafted him in the 1st or 2nd round, chances are you just went robust running back. I'm sorry, you just went hero running back, right?
Yep.
If you ended up with no running backs in the first 3 rounds of your draft, 4 rounds of your draft, because the wide receiver value was so good and everyone just was pouncing on running backs, and you ended up with 3 ballers at wide receiver, guess what? You just ended up going 0 RB, right? So it's worth understanding all these strategies so at least you know, okay, boom, I just fell into 0 RB. How should I handle the rest of this draft, right? And that's what we're going to be that's what we're going to be talking about here. So we want to figure out who these later RBs are. You might want to go zero running back. You might want to go hero running back. Let me just explain what zero running back is real quick. When you don't go running back in the first or five, when you don't go running back for the first 4 or 5 rounds, and then you try to identify a few running backs who can help you early and some who could potentially break out later in the year, right? These guys likely won't be averaging RB1 points to start, but the goal is to at least grab 1 or 2 top 24 guys potentially. Maybe not ADP wise, but they could end up being that way come week 2 or week 3 based on what we're projecting for them if things shake the right way, right? And then you continue to build that depth at the running back position to give you some chances to hit big on the running back position, while your high-end wide receivers that you drafted in their place can hold it down for you, but also potentially compensate for your weakness at running back. Maybe you draft a tight end early. That gives you a massive advantage over the other tight ends. We call it positional advantage, right? That helps you overcome your weaknesses at running back. And then if you have later round running backs that end up hitting, your team can end up being a juggernaut. It definitely takes a little bit of luck, but the skill is identifying 1 or 2 running backs in the draft who end up hitting big late, and then basically you just heavily work the waiver wire after that.
Right. With zero running back, I like to treat it as just playing the lottery at the running back position, because I'm a big wide receiver guy. I prefer wide receivers, and I think that you kind of are that way a little bit too, especially in Dynasty. But when we're talking redraft, like I've always leaned towards the zero running back strategy because I think it's easier to hit on a running back because there are fewer running backs out there. There's more technically good lottery tickets, if that makes sense. Like there's a bunch of receivers. You can take late round receivers. There's so many of them, and it's going to be fluctuating all the time. For me, I'd rather take the chances on a more scarce position at running back because there's always 1 or 2 guys. Like Kyron Williams last year, like he came out of nowhere. Those are the types of players that we're looking for. They don't have to be going like where Kyron Williams was last year. I don't even know if Kyron Williams was being drafted. He was going very, very late in drafts if he was. But it could be guys in the 6th, 7th round. One of the guys that I like this year, Jonathan Brooks, I think that he can really break out. Now, obviously, he's not going super duper late, but what you're doing is you're trying to find assets at running back that can appreciate either very quickly or when it matters, like down the stretch towards the playoffs, when hopefully your wide receivers are carrying you to at least be in contention for a playoff spot. And then once you're in, you're good. That's the way I like to treat zero running back. I'm just playing the lottery at that position.
One of the advantages of this is that you can avoid being hit hard when a running back that you take early gets hurt. It's the position that has the most injuries. So if that running back that you have ends up getting hurt, well, you took him later. So there isn't as much sunk cost when they do get hurt. All right, so let's identify a few running backs that we might consider.
Can I just add on to that quick? Like, if you're playing this game, like I said, taking the late running backs, chances are if another running back gets hurt, you might have stashed like 5 or 6 different handcuffs and players that might end up in a better situation. So not only are you insulated against running back injuries because you drafted them low, you didn't invest a whole lot in them, but you can also benefit from them. You know, obviously other teams, it's that switch of power. You know, obviously the amount of value that you have switches teams when a running back gets hurt. If you draft handcuffs for other players, like it's a fantastic way to go about it. Like there are definitely upsides. There's downsides too, but that's just one of the upsides that you also have, like you mentioned, being insulated against injuries to your players at running back.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that you mentioned, that transfer of power, right, in your league where you end up, you have, you know, maybe the 1B on an offense, or you in a backfield, or you have the handcuff, or the handcuff who's getting a little bit of work, right, on your bench. But then that starter gets hurt. That team just lost one of their top running backs, who they drafted in the first couple of rounds, and now they're really hurt. Meanwhile, you didn't have to worry about that. A player that you picked much later in the draft, more of a lottery ticket, just increased the strength of your team tenfold, right? So I love that point. Now, I want to consider, let's identify a few running backs who we might consider, right? Round 5 or later, using sleeper ADP, all right? And, you know, we're going to kind of go round by round and see, like, you know, are we happy with these guys? Like, who would we be happy with when we're building a zero RB team in each of these rounds? So in the 5th round, you have Kenneth Walker, Alvin Kamara, and Aaron Jones, right? Which of these 3 guys, Zach, would you choose if you have no running backs by the 5th round are you looking at any of these guys as the first running back that you're taking off the board?
Right. So assuming this is our RB1, we haven't touched running back up until the
Yes,
5th round.
correct.
I think the safest pick is Alvin Kamara because of his receiving upside. But I think the pick that I want for upside, because we're playing zero running back lottery ticket, I'm going with Kenneth Walker. I love the offense he's in. I think that they're going to be scoring a lot more points, running at a faster pace. Obviously, he has Zach Charbonnet in the backfield, but we don't know how they're going to treat him. And we're in the 5th round. I have a guy that scored, I think it was it 8 touchdowns last year? He scored plenty of touchdowns last season. I think he has 10-plus touchdown upside. I'm going to go for him, Kenneth Walker, at this point. And you mentioned Aaron Jones. He's in there, too. I don't know what this offense is going to look like. I don't know how much I trust Sam Darnold. I don't know how much I trust J.J. McCarthy. There's a whole situation there at quarterback. We know what we're getting with Seattle. At this point, I'm going to go with the guy that has the upside, the touchdown upside, Kenneth Walker.
I still have no problem going wide receiver once again in the 5th round, right? If you have to, right? If I had to choose, I think Kenneth Walker might be the choice here. Alvin Kamara in a full PPR league, totally get that as well. But, knowing me, you know how much I might be drafting, a little bit of, different running back who I shall not name because I name him in every single podcast that we do, Kendra Miller.
Right.
6th round, James Conner, David Montgomery. Yep.
You mentioned 5th round, like you said, you would have no problem taking a receiver there. Like, who's a receiver going in the 5th round right now that you might think about taking there? Just a couple names going in the 5th round right now in sleeper. There's George Pickens, there's T. Higgins, there's Keenan Allen. Amari Cooper's one that sticks out to me. He's going 58th overall in the 5th round, so it's like I would be cool with that. I think that's kind of where I'd be. I don't know how you feel.
Me too. I'm cool with taking Amari Cooper or T. Higgins there. Both of those guys would definitely be on my radar, and I'm okay taking another wide receiver in the 5th round and going straight to the 6th round because you have James Conner, David Montgomery, DeAndre Swift, and Ramondre Stevenson. I think all these guys, I'll be happy drafting these guys. Now, I think David Montgomery is probably he's safe, right? He's going to score those touchdowns. He's going to give you 10 to 15 PPR points a week, most likely, pretty consistent. I think James Conner probably has the most upside out of all these guys because most likely he's going to be their workhorse. I think it's going to be relatively decent offense in Arizona. So, James Conner, to me, while he's healthy, there's a good chance that he's an RB1, right? For this offense. So, and for fantasy, would you be surprised over the first 5 weeks of the season if James Conner was a fantasy RB1? I think he could be a low-end RB1 pretty easily, right? So that's why, maybe if I have a different type of build coming into the 6th round, I might not go in that direction. Maybe I go with someone like David Montgomery to kind of supplement my team opposed to just going for that ceiling. But because I am coming into this with no running backs, for example, I think James Conner might be that guy. If I'm grabbing my second running back, let's say we grabbed Kenneth Walker in the 1st, maybe I'm still going James Conner here. But I think David Montgomery is also a pretty decent pick here. Are you? I know you're pretty high on Ramondre. Are you considering Ramondre here over these 3 guys?
I wouldn't put him over James Conner. I would probably put him over David Montgomery just because I think he has more of the upside. He can have a higher upside on a week-to-week basis. Now, if you want the floor, say you already shot for the sky, shot for the moon, whatever, I'd say Kenneth Walker's, I don't want to say shooting for the moon, but, you're going to have to rely on touchdowns there. If you want a little bit more consistent production, I'd say you want to go David Montgomery. But if you want the higher upside each week with potential to, flame out a little bit, Ramondre Stevenson, he's on the Patriots offense, is still probably going to be bottom 12 this season. That would be my guess, unless Drake May is some revelation. Then maybe I would consider
bottom 12. Hey, listen, if you tell me the Patriots are bottom 12, I'm moving him up in my rankings because I'm looking at them as a bottom 5 offense. This year.
We had this conversation in the comments. I was like, I'm Mr. Optimism, I guess, with that offense. But you talk to Joe, he'll tell you even more. He'll be even more optimistic about that.
Yeah, he will. He's a resident Patriots fan. All right, moving to the 7th round here, you have Najee Harris, Tony Pollard, Raheem Mostert, and Zamir White. To me, one name pops out here, and I don't know about you, but Raheem Mostert is almost a smash pick here in the 7th round for me. Even though I'm not the biggest fan of older running backs, this guy finished as the RB3 in points per game last year, whatever it was. The dude is, if he still has it, and he was very efficient last year still, if he still has something left in the tank, And I'm not saying he's going to hold up all season long, but at least to start the year, I think he's a little bit of a smash pick here, isn't he?
Yeah, he has to be. Just based on that upside alone, he's in an excellent scheme with Mike McDaniel. And Devon Achane's there. We know that they drafted Jalen Wright. But Mike McDaniel just came out this past weekend. There was a report. I saw it when I was writing up the newsletter. And it said that he said Raheem Mostert is pretty much leading this backfield right now. So, like you said, if it's going to be just the first couple of weeks, like that can change, obviously, over time. Devon Achane is very good. Jalen Wright is very good. And they're going to be throwing to Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. But if Raheem Mostert is the lead back pretty much, obviously getting more carries, like you can't really go wrong here at 7th round price. Like when have you seen a guy score 20 touchdowns and go in the 7th round the next year? Like that's just crazy to me.
It is. All right, 8th round, Nick Chubb, Javonte Williams, Jonathan Brooks, Zach Moss, Austin Eckler. Another round where one guy sticks out to me like a sore thumb.
Yeah, and I think we're in agreement here. Like, who you going with? Because I have my pick.
You say it, man. You say it. I mean, you've already said it, so that's why.
Yeah, for me, it's Jonathan Brooks. It's Jonathan Brooks. And it's just everybody else is in a situation where I think I can see the backfield being a mess all season. You know what I mean? I don't think any of the other guys have a chance of clearly separating themselves. We're talking about Nick Chubb, Javonte Williams, Zach Moss, Austin Eckler. Like all of them have circumstances where the other guy is going to be mixing in plenty. Where Jonathan Brooks, I think he can take over the Panthers backfield. He just has to get healthy. I think he's one of those guys you have to draft him, leave him on your bench, stomach that for a week or two, especially if he's not playing. He might not necessarily be ready. We're not sure where he is in his recovery right now. But as soon as he comes back and he gets healthy, I'm expecting by midseason for him to be taking 65% of the snaps and maybe even more in the Panthers backfield.
I wouldn't be scared off if Chuba Hubbard got like 50% of the work, like weeks 1, 2, 3. You know what I mean? Maybe
Right.
the first quarter of the season. Look at what Breece Hall did last year. It was a very similar thing, and we were worried, right? Like these other running backs, getting work. Who was it last year? Was it Michael Carter? Getting some work, alongside
Before he
Breece
was traded,
Hall.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, and Israel Abanikanda, he was just drafted, so there was some rumblings about that. Like, oh, is he going to get some work? But Breece Hall ended up taking over, right, once he was fully healthy. And I think it's going to be a similar situation with Jonathan Brooks. He's being taken way too late for a potential workhorse, a very talented workhorse here. I think Javonte Williams can also, that's a real boom-bust type of pick there. I think Jonathan Brooks is a lot safer and also has a near equal type of boom as Javonte Williams without as much of the risk, in my opinion, even coming off the ACL injury. Okay?
Yeah.
So going into the 9th round, Jalen Warren, Devin Singletary, Trey Benson. I think Trey Benson's going a little too high for me in drafts. He's a handcuff. I think he's very talented. I think if James Conner were to go down, I think Trey Benson 100% has, RB1 type of upside. Think of Kenneth Walker when... Who was it that got hurt in front of him? Was it? Am I? Who was?
I don't think we're going back to Chris
ahead?
Carson, are we?
Are we going back to
No.
Chris Carson? We might
don't
be.
think we are.
Why did
Really?
I think of Chris Carson?
Why is that the
I
name
also
that
thought of
popped
Chris
in
Carson
mind?
when I mentioned it.
I hear you, yeah.
This is going to be haunting me now. Now I got to look it up, man. Now I got to look it up. Kenneth Walker. All right, let's see who was there. Everyone who's listening right now is like, yes, it was Kenneth Walker. You guys are right, but who knows? Let's see. I'm looking at his senior year. It was only 2 years ago. So let's see who it was.
Chris Carson was out before that, I think, unfortunately.
Yeah.
In 2021.
Rashad
Penny. Rashad Penny. Oh, my God. Was it him?
It was Rashad Penny. Yes, it was Rashad
Yeah.
Penny. Exactly.
Because he had a ridiculous 5 weeks. I remember that.
Yeah, exactly. And he got hurt, and it was all Kenneth Walker after that point, right? So despite the fact that they drafted him relatively early, it ended up being him. Anyway, the point is that Trey Benson can have that kind of year if James Conner were to miss some time. Okay, but drafting him as a handcuff this early is a little bit too high to me. I personally rather get Jalen Warren. Here's the thing with Jalen Warren. It's possible that he ends up with 70 targets, 70 catches this year even, right? Yep. And if that's the case and he gets more than like 150, 170 carries with Arthur Smith, we saw how much he split between Tyler Algier and Bijan Robinson. Bijan has a much higher case of taking carries away from Tyler Algier than Najee Harris does, from Jalen Warren. So imagine like if he was splitting it that close with those two guys, I think it's going to be pretty close with these two. And Jalen Warren is going later than Najee Harris in drafts. And if you're in a PPR league, man, like Jaylen Warren, he has RB1 upside if he gets a certain level of opportunity here and is extremely involved in the receiving game. Okay, just keep that in mind. All right, so I think
And
Warren
he's
is an
really
upside
cheap.
pick. But at the very least, dude, like he has a safe floor as well. He's going to be very
Yeah.
involved.
I don't understand what he's doing. I mean, in the 9th round, but then also behind Najee Harris, who's proven to be worlds less efficient. Like it just makes no sense.
The thing is, I think people are excited about Najee because they know how run-heavy Arthur Smith is. And there's a world where Najee Harris gets another 300 touches in this offense and is the primary goal line back. I understand that. I don't think the offense is going to be that good to care that much about the goal line role. And we've also seen Tyler Algier be pretty involved on the goal line. I know he's a much bigger back than Jaylen Warren. I totally understand. But I don't remember they played Cordell Patterson there too, right? So like I don't think there's going to be a situation where, by the way, Cordell Patterson is on the Steelers.
He is on the Steelers.
So,
yeah.
and I just saw a report about him like saying like he's not just a special teams player, he's going to have more of a role. That's exactly what we want to hear, and it's Arthur Smith on top of that. So good luck, okay, drafting Najee Harris that early. But I think Jaylen Warren is a clear 0 RB target. Okay, 10th round. Tajay Spears, Brian Robinson, Gus Edwards, Blake Corum, Zeke Elliott. I think Blake Corum is also, a little bit of a glorified handcuff as well, so I'm not grabbing him here. I totally understand the league-winning appeal, but Kyrie Williams would have to get hurt for that to happen, okay? Tajay Spears to me, Brian Robinson, Gus Edwards, like these 3 guys would be my targets here. Brian Robinson, maybe not on that good of an offense. Gus Edwards on more of a run-heavy offense. Tajay Spears in a split backfield, obviously. We don't know what the backfield in LA is going to look like, right? But I do think that taking the shot on Gus Edwards here makes a lot of sense. Obviously, they have Kamani Vidal, there, but we haven't really heard much about him, right? It's just merely a projection at this point, right? The rookies are starting training camp today on July 16th. Well, this week, depending on what team we're talking about. But in terms of like who has the safest workload, I'm guessing it's Brian Robinson here. Gus Edwards, like he is the lead back right now. How much work does he actually get this year? There's a lot of questions, right? I think we're getting into like a little bit of the question mark round. If you had to choose one of these 3 guys, I'm assuming you're not going Zeke or Blake Corum here, but if you had to choose one of the other 3 guys, who are you going with here? It's not super straightforward to me personally.
It's not super straightforward to me too because they're all their own different type of running back. Like I think Tajay Spears, as long as Tony Pollard is healthy, he's going to be locked in just a battle for touches there, and it'll go either way. But I don't think the upside's there that you're really going to get unless Tony Pollard would get injured. Brian Robinson, I like his role, but like you mentioned, the offense we're not sure. And Gus Edwards is like the exact same thing. Like he can be a touchdown merchant. We saw it last season with the Ravens, but that's on a much better offense. So now you go with the Chargers. I don't want to say the Chargers are going to be terrible, but I just don't know if they're going to be at the point where Gus Edwards, you're going to want to rely on him scoring those touchdowns over and over. Yes, he has the role probably locked down at the goal line. Given Kamani Vidal, he's more of the receiving back. He's not a guy that you're going to use at the goal line. And then also J.K. Dobbins kind of made of glass. So for me, I think if I had to pick one, I go Gus Edwards just because of the touchdown upside. We've seen it before. It's there. And I don't want to just write off the Chargers offense. I'm still not sure it's going to bring Gus Edwards that 13, 14 touchdown upside. But if he gets 8 or 9 touchdowns, I'm okay with that in the 10th round.
Yeah, I think I lean in a similar direction. One thing that is appealing for Brian Robinson, my hope with Brian Robinson is that he's running routes on early downs, right? The other thing is that, with a mobile quarterback, those lanes could be a little bit easier for him to run through, right? A little more open for him, right? So we could see that. So I think we have to kind of keep an eye out on during training camp on this situation. But again, a couple of running backs in the 10th round you can grab. Let me just roll through the rest of these. I have 11th round, Chase Brown, Jerome Ford, and Zach Charbonnet. Would you agree, yes or no, that Jerome Ford would be the pick here pretty easily?
Yeah, he has to be because Nick Chubb might not even be playing to start the season, so we'll see.
Jerome Ford is one of the clear and must-have 0 running backs in all of drafts right now, in the 11th round. Absolutely ridiculous. You can start him as an RB2 in week 1. Okay. 12th round, Jalen Wright, Chuba Hubbard, Kendre Miller, J.K. Dobbins. Not going J.K. Dobbins coming off the Achilles injury. Jalen Wright, he has to depend on one of the running backs in Miami to get hurt. Chuba Hubbard, maybe you could start him for the first couple weeks of the season, but like, what's the upside, especially if Jonathan Brooks is healthy? Kendra Miller is my pick here, if I had to pick one of these guys, because Kendra Miller, while you might not have confidence to start him early on in the season. I definitely would not, unless something changes during training camp and we understand that he is the guy. I doubt that happens. This is more of a situation where he can tend to break out as the season goes on. He was a very good prospect, and he could end up taking that early down role as the main runner on the Saints offense, which is, by the way, brand new OC. Okay, so this is a situation where they can come in, evaluate this from scratch, keep Alvin Kamara in his receiving role, but Kendra Miller could potentially not only be their early down back, but the primary goal line back as well. That's the upside for Kendra Miller. You're potentially drafting a running back who can get 250 carries this year. That's the upside, okay?
Exactly.
A lot of downside too. Okay? Like, this is not a lock. This is not a slam dunk. He's just more of a lottery pick who has the pedigree and the opportunity to potentially have a big role this year.
Right. Potentially appreciating asset in Kendre Miller versus a probably depreciating asset in Chuba Hubbard. Like, the trajectory that I'm looking at for Chuba Hubbard is eventually he's going to be at a point where he's not going to be startable. And Kendre Miller, he's going to start where, okay, maybe you might not want to start him, like you mentioned, but then you look up 6 or 7 weeks in the season, suddenly he's trending up. He's on that trajectory where he's going to be very startable later in the season, especially when it matters during the playoffs. That could be a huge boon for your team. So I'm 100% in on this one with Kendre Miller here. I think he's the only one I'm really happy taking in the 12th round.
13th round, you have Rico Dowdle, Ty Chandler, and Marshawn Lloyd. For me, it's Marshawn Lloyd. Again, handcuff situation, but there's been a lot of rumblings where he's going to be more than a handcuff. He's going to be somebody that they're going to give opportunities to. Even the OC said that, yes, we've given A.J. Dillon touches before, but we're looking to give Marshawn Lloyd even more touches than we gave A.J. Dillon and give him even more opportunity, which is exactly what you want to hear if you have Marshawn Lloyd, but not what you want to hear if you have Josh Jacobs. That's why Josh Jacobs is an avoid for me at his price and why Marshawn Lloyd is a great pick in the 13th round. What if you get a flex in Marshawn Lloyd? That would be amazing because you can potentially start him in a pinch if you have to, right? Get a couple points or whatever. But then if Josh Jacobs ends up getting hurt, remember, he's reaching that 1,500 carry threshold this year. Potentially, Marshawn Lloyd could potentially be a big name that you end up with on your bench. Okay.
Yeah.
I think going over what we just went over, the zero RB approach is very tempting, right? You're avoiding a position that gets hurt often early in your drafts. So if you do hit on a few of these running backs later, and you combine that with the elite or near elite wide receivers and tight ends and quarterbacks that you drafted, you could be sitting pretty. All right. Let's go over the hero running back strategy, right? Who are the running backs we would be happy building our team around? This is a running back who has to be dependable and who will give us RB1 numbers week in and week out, and preferably be a high-end RB1. You grab that guy early, and you focus on other positions in the first, in the other 4 or 5 rounds to start your draft. An easy way for this to happen is if you have a pick in the first 7 or 8 picks, right? You can end up with a CMC, Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson, right? These 3, I think, are the ones most would feel comfortable being their hero running back. Okay?
Right.
Me personally, I'd add Kyron Williams to this list, right? And then you can make a case for guys like Jahmyr Gibbs, Jonathan Taylor, Saquon Barkley, maybe Derrick Henry. Out of all of these guys, are any of the guys that I mentioned, are you not super okay with them being like your foundation, your hero running back, as like the guy that you're good with drafting one running back early and then like focusing on other positions for the next several rounds? Or are you relatively okay with these guys, and would you add anybody else to it?
I don't know if I'd add anybody else. I think your top 3, everybody has them as their top 3. CMC, Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson. But the one that I'm leery of is Jonathan Taylor. We saw him get injured before. We know he has that in his range of outcomes here now. He has a rushing quarterback, obviously, with Anthony Richardson. I think that they're going to be a very good offense, but I don't know if the workload is 100% going to be there in the passing game like we like to see from a hero running back. Like a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs, he's going to have that receiving workload. We know it's going to be there. Saquon Barkley, I think he can get that. He has Jalen Hurts at quarterback, so it's a similar type of situation. Derrick Henry is going to be relying on touchdowns. Jonathan Taylor's a good running back. Don't get me wrong. But if I'm sitting there and of all those guys that you mentioned, I have Jonathan Taylor on my team, and then I'm rolling in the next few rounds of thinking I'm going to ignore running back. I feel like I would be tempted to be like, I need to hedge this team a little bit. I need to get a little insurance here, take another guy. I might end up throwing out the hero running back situation. We might end up going robust running back. I like all of these guys. They all have upside to be the hero running back. Don't get me wrong. But if I had to pick one where I'm like, I'm not sure, it would be Jonathan Taylor.
I think one positive about the hero running back strategy opposed to zero running back is that you're not just leaving your hopes up to shaky running back situations, right? If you grab your first running back in round 5 or 6, there's a reason why they're going that late, right? Because their upside and their floor isn't guaranteed. The only negative, or one of the negatives around hero running back, is that you are taking the risk that one of your early assets has a higher chance of getting hurt because they are a running back, okay? Now, before I talk about the robust running back strategy, I want to let you know that this episode is brought to you by Underdog Fantasy. If you want to do some mock drafts and really go against the market, because these are paid contests, okay? So the market is a lot sharper here, okay? As little as just a couple bucks per draft, and then you have a chance of winning money against who you're up against at the end of the year. Whether it's private drafts with me or your friends, or if you want to join these big money contests like Best Ball Mania. By the way, they just introduced a college football version of Best Ball Mania, which is absolutely amazing, along with, obviously, everyone's been waiting for college football to, play. By the way, Zach, did you get your copy of CFB, or are you not into that?
I didn't get it, no. It's pretty expensive. Yeah. I actually don't have a new gen console. So
You don't have a next gen console. Oh, okay. So right. That's how you know Zach doesn't have a next gen console, because he called it a new gen console. Okay, so there are a bunch of contests you can choose from on Underdog: fast drafts, slow drafts. All you have to do is draft, and you're done. Best Ball sets your lineup for you. There is no in-season management. It is amazing. So use code UPPERHAND when you sign up, so that you get your first deposit bonus up to $250, and you get your free square for your first pick'em contest as well. I'll have the link to Underdog in the description of this episode, so go check it out and draft your first team today. So, robust running back strategy simply means that you grab a few running backs early, so that you don't have to worry about running back depth at one of these scarcest positions. While everyone desperately scrambles on the waiver wire all year, at the hopes that a backup running back who just got opportunity will be their guy, you don't have to be as desperate, right? And many who go with this strategy would say that there is enough wide receiver depth and upside in the middle rounds that it makes sense to go this route. That's just what they say. Let's see if that holds true, all right? Let's say, and let's talk about a little bit of a situation here, right? Let's say you have a middle pick. You go Breece Hall in the first. You're able to go Kyren Williams in the second. By the way, for me personally, that would be an amazing start to a draft. I'm just letting you know.
I'm done.
For me,
yep,
amazing.
I'm with you.
Kyren Williams, will he, like, if you're selecting in the middle of the first round, if Kyren's available with your pick in the second round, like for me personally, I'm all over that. Anyway, I think you're chilling at running back at this point. Okay, if you started that way. In the next round, you're like, you know what? Isaiah Pacheco is available. I'm tripling down. Okay, now you just went robust running back. Okay, now you look at round 4. You can grab guys like Cooper Kupp, DK Metcalf, Devontae Smith. You can also choose to go Trey McBride as well. Round 5, T. Higgins, Amari Cooper, Keenan Allen, maybe Tank Dell, if you're picking early in the round, right? Now, through 5 rounds here, you have 3 running backs, you have 2 wide receivers, or you have 3 running backs, 1 wide receiver, 1 tight end. Okay, just keep that in mind. So I'm just keeping track of what we might have and where we're sitting, especially if you might have, you're starting 2 running backs, you're starting 1 flex and 3 wide receivers, that those 2 running back spots and that 1 flex spot is already filled out. Okay? You go to round 6 now. You might have 1 or 2 receivers on your roster, maybe 1 or no tight ends. Rome Odunze, Rashee Rice, Christian Kirk, right? He's going a little earlier in the 6th round. Terry McLaurin. It's starting to get a little dry, right, at this point, okay? Now, Rashee Rice, keep in mind, he might not be available for like the first 4 to 6 weeks, right? So you really don't have your second wide receiver here at this point, or your third wide receiver if you went 2 wide receivers early. Rome Odunze, like, How much are you trusting that, right? Huge range of outcomes with Rome Odunze. I personally think his upside is low in wide receiver 1, but his downside is maybe, high in wide receiver 4, right? Based on the talent
Yeah.
that's in Chicago, right? Christian Kirk, I think he's going earlier in that round, so he's a little bit, a little bit safer. I think he's a good pick there, but earlier in the 6th, you might not be able to grab him. Terry McLaurin, same story potentially this year. Who knows? A little bit of range of, huge range of outcomes in terms of on a week-to-week basis, right? Round 7
Right.
is I kind of like wide receivers in round 7, okay? It's almost like you have to draft a wide receiver in round 7. You have Chris Godwin, Jaden Reed, Hollywood Brown, Calvin Ridley. Round 7 is a wide receiver round based on those names I just mentioned, is it not?
No, it absolutely is. Chris Godwin, we talked about him moving back into the slot. We know the case with him. He's going to be much better this season. Jaden Reed, he has upside in the Packers offense. Hollywood Brown, I love him with Patrick Mahomes, especially if Rashee Rice is going to be missing some time. He could really pay off in the early going. He could have some big games. And Calvin Ridley, he was a 130 target receiver last season. He can go into Tennessee and do the same thing. DeAndre Hopkins isn't the steal all the work type of receiver that he used to be. He did have some very good peripherals last season, but he didn't have that competition working against him. He was competing with who? Nick Westbrook-Akina and Traylon Burks, guys that aren't going to be target earners. So there's plenty of value to be had in round 7. I'm with you on that one, especially looking at some of the other running backs going in that range too. I would definitely go with wide receiver in round 7.
Yeah, and then you're looking at round 8. You mentioned DeAndre Hopkins, but then Deontay Johnson's going in round 8 as well, right? So, I mentioned him at the top of the podcast as one of those guys that if you're going to go robust running back, and you want to understand which wide receivers are going to be available, I think Deontay Johnson, specifically in PPR leagues, is going to be that dude. Remember, Adam Thielen was a PPR wide receiver 1 for a huge chunk of the season, right? And he's nowhere as close to being as good as Deontay Johnson is, right? So we're going to have a new offense with the quarterback whisperer coming in, as their head coach. And the situation can be pretty different, right? We know what the baseline is, at least, but there's a little bit of upside here that I think not that many people are taking into account. If Bryce Young were to take a step forward and the head coach, Dave Canales bringing in a new system and some help for his quarterback and just helping his quarterback do what he does best. What are your thoughts here? The wide receivers that I mentioned through these last few rounds here. If you went 3 running backs early, how do you feel about this strategy based on the wide receivers that I talked about?
I think I would want to make sure I nail down at least one wide receiver 1 on their team, if that makes sense. Guys, you mentioned round 4, DK Metcalf, I consider him, he's a wide receiver 1 on the team. Obviously, Tyler Lockett, he out-targeted him last season. But you talk about fantasy point upside, that kind of thing, it's DK Metcalf there. Amari Cooper, same thing. I go with him. I want to grab one of those 2 guys to at least have it, the fallback to say, okay, I have someone who's going to lead their team in targets. Deontay Johnson's one of those guys, too. He's a huge value.
Deontay Johnson, one of those guys too, 100%. I agree with you. But so based on that logic, maybe you won't go Christian Kirk, right, in the 6th round,
right?
If you didn't already grab at least one wide receiver 1 on their team, because the targets can go multiple ways, right? If I had to project, maybe I would project Christian Kirk to be the number 1 target, but it might not be by much, right? It might not be Evan Ingram could be there, Brian Thomas Jr. potentially, right? We'll see. So yeah, I think that's a great point. I'm not sure I like this route more than the 0 running back route, or the hero running back route. I usually go 0 RB or hero RB unless the board falls in a way that I can get Breece Hall and Kyron Williams. It'll be amazing.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that they've drafted Blake Corum because Kyron Williams' ADP just fell, and it's great, and I'm taking advantage of that every single time. So yeah, if I had to choose a strategy, it's probably 0 RB for me or hero RB for me. I'm mostly flexible. For example, if Amon-Ra falls to the 8th pick in the 1st round, I'm taking him. If Breece Hall falls, I'm taking him, and then I adjust from there, right? I'm all about value, just like you mentioned earlier. You are as well. I'm always looking at who falls, and I'm always thinking about who can I combine with that guy that I pick with my next pick, right? And I'm all about building a balanced team. This year, I do happen to like taking a tight end early, and I'm fine taking a quarterback early in specific lulls, and we'll talk about that in a second. But with all that being said, I think it's important to understand that you should do mock drafts on the platform that you'll be drafting on, right? Understand which guys might be available. Know that if you end up going a little RB heavy early and you grabbed a tight end early, you should already have an understanding which wide receivers will be available in later rounds, like I mentioned, and vice versa, right? If you end up going wide receiver early, you should know which running backs will be available a little bit later, and you should identify which ones you'd be happy taking and starting in week 1 if you have to, okay? Related to this, have a list ready of your favorite late round targets, because when you're in the last round or the second to last round, you want to make an educated decision and an educated guess on which lottery ticket you're putting on your roster, right? We have a few. That's a conversation for an upcoming episode. But because when you're in the last round, right, like you might look at the ADP list, you might even see your guy. You might not even see your guy until you keep scrolling, right? Like you can keep going down. Like, oh wait, like I ended up missing my guy, like that I really wanted because I just forgot to keep scrolling further. It's happened to me multiple times, right? So just keep an eye out on that. Make sure you have that list, right? If you had to, if you had to tell me, yeah, go ahead.
That's what I call tunnel vision. If you catch yourself, you think that, okay, I know exactly. You don't know, you don't have that list, and you're thinking, all right, I'm going to draft this guy. You tell yourself, I'm going to draft this guy, and then 3 rounds later, he comes off the board way later than he was supposed to because the platform you were on was feeding you all these other players above him on the ADP list. Like, that's the worst feeling ever. And like you mentioned, it's happened to you. It's happened to me plenty of times. And it's not like it's going to be game breaking. It's not, if you're drafting at the end of the draft, it's your last round pick, that kind of thing. Obviously, it's not going to be like, oh man, I really messed up there. But still, like, we've seen guys, Puka Nacua last year, they can turn into a lot more. So you don't want to miss out on those guys that you want to get. Don't get that tunnel vision, like we just said, with the platform, because you want to have that list.
Let's talk about tight ends, man. I think any of the first 6 tight ends have a chance of finishing as the tight end 1 this year. Sam Laporta, Travis Kelce, Trey McBride, Mark Andrews, Dalton Kincaid, Kyle Pitts. I personally find myself grabbing a lot of Trey McBride. I find myself grabbing a lot of Mark Andrews. I also find myself grabbing some of Kyle Pitts when he falls, assuming I didn't grab one of those other guys earlier. I'm just a big fan of what I think the Atlanta offense is going to look like. And I have a feeling that they're going to use him pretty nicely.
Right.
Out of all of these guys that I just mentioned and their relative prices, somewhere between, the late second. Sam Laporta is going in the late second, dude, on Sleeper, which is a little insane to me personally. So I'm not going there. But, like, which are the guys here that, like, based on price and, upside and all that, like, who are you most likely targeting?
Okay, so if I'm being truly frugal, and I'm talking about price, the 3 Ps, I'm going with the other P, Pitts. I'm going to go with Kyle Pitts because I think he has that type of upside if Kirk Cousins can be healthy. Now, obviously, I think he's the least safe option of all these tight ends at the top of the draft, like you mentioned, but I think he does have that upside to be the tight end 1. If you want to talk ideal, and you've beat this to death, I think, plenty of times, but I'm on the same boat as you. Ideal combination of upside and price, talent, it's Trey McBride. I don't think that there's a better pick at tight end. I know you said that you're really zoning in on him, and you're going to talk about him. I can see that. But Mark Andrews, too. Like, don't forget, he's a very good tight end. He's been a tight end 1 before. He ended Travis Kelce's streak. I think it was back in 2021. Now, obviously, there are better receivers around him now than there were that season. But still, Mark Andrews is Lamar Jackson's go-to guy when he's on the field. He gets the most first read targets in that offense, which correlate pretty nicely with fantasy points per game. I like Mark Andrews there too. So if I don't get Trey McBride, I think I would go with Mark Andrews. And then if I don't get him, Kyle Pitts would be my Hail Mary pick.
Mark Andrews tied for the tight end 1 in most fantasy points per game last year before he got hurt. Okay? And I think people have just forgotten. Now, once these guys are off the board, we have George Kittle, Evan Ingram, Brock Bowers, David Njoku, Jake Ferguson, Dallas Goedert, TJ Hawkinson, Dalton Schultz. And that's through 9 rounds, right? I'm personally not big on this group. I really am hoping I can grab one of the first 6 that I mentioned. The reason being that I'm looking for a tight end who has a shot at creating positional advantage against my opponent on a weekly basis. Who are your targets here if you targeted anybody within this group?
I think there's 2 of them that really stick out to me. It's Evan Ingram and Jake Ferguson. for completely opposite reasons. If I'm taking a tight end this late, I've probably punted. I didn't get any of the first 6 guys. I'm like, okay, I'm not going to hinge myself on grabbing another tight end just because I feel like I need to take a tight end. That's not me. That's not going to be good for your value. But Evan Engram at his price right now, I like him. I think he's a tight end 8. Like, I'm cool with Evan Engram because we saw him get a bunch of those targets. I think he's still probably going to be the first or second option for Trevor Lawrence. We know he's been a top 5 or 6 tight end each of the past 2 years that he's been in Jacksonville. I like Evan Engram there, but I also like Jake Ferguson because I think the upside is there. He's going to be, I think, the clear number 2 in the Cowboys offense. They're going to be super pass heavy. I've kind of beat this one to death too. He's my, top 5 pick, but not top 5 in my rankings. He has that type of upside if he can get those targets, and Dallas can get a little bit better in the red zone. We know I think he led, or he was second for most end zone targets. He only had, I think it was 5 touchdowns last season, 6 touchdowns. So if he could get a little bit more efficient there in the red zone, like, he could really turn things around for you. And TJ Hawkinson's there too. He was very, very good last season, but obviously he had Kirk Cousins. Now he's different quarterbacks. I'm kind of avoiding that whole situation because he could miss games and then also not be himself with a worse quarterback. Like, I'm avoiding him.
It was a pretty rough injury for him, and the quality of the offense might not be the same. So there's definitely some issues there with TJ Hawkinson, but I do think he is a little bit of an upside play if that's what you're going for. But I do agree with you. Evan Engram and Jake Ferguson would be my 2 guys. I find myself passing on Engram and then maybe, hopefully, being able to grab Ferguson just a little bit later.
Right.
It's important to know which guys you will grab in case the draft doesn't really fall your way, and then you can grab your tight ends, right? So if you end up missing on the first 6, and then you miss on the guys, that you're willing to take in the next 7, I think Pat Frymuth in the 11th round, based on how much Arthur Smith's offenses target the tight end, and he doesn't have that much behind him. Hunter Henry in the 15th round, Tyler Conklin in the last round, Noah Fant in the last round. That's kind of where I'm at. If the rumors are true and Devontae Adams goes to the Jets, that would probably kill Tyler Conklin's fantasy relevance. But we'll see. I think Jonnu Smith.
I'm sure.
As a Jets fan, I'm praying for that one. But if I had Tyler Conklin, that would suck. But Jonnu Smith, Jelani Woods, Juwan Johnson, Zach Ertz, I think all guys who can be. I wouldn't be surprised if they become fantasy relevant, but I don't think they have the upside of being any higher than a low end tight end 1. If that, right? Most likely high end tight end 2s at their ceiling. Those guys are pretty much going undrafted right now. Okay.
Right.
Did I miss any late round tight ends at all that is worth mentioning, or am I good?
I looked down the list. I mean, I don't want to hinge too much on it, but Mike Gesicki, he is in that offense. Cincinnati just lost their slot receiver, and there was a report that came out over the weekend about him being potentially a big slot. He's a real draft flyer. I don't even think you have to draft him. I think you could probably get him on the waivers afterwards. But he could have a small role. Again, not someone that you're going to have tight end 1 type numbers, but if you could be a tight end 2 for you, pinch starter, if a tight end that you have already gets hurt, or you're just streaming every week, like I wouldn't have a problem with him.
Let's move to quarterbacks, man. This is probably where I'm the most all over the place. I find myself with teams with Josh Allen on it, Jalen Hurts on it, which is early, right? I do find teams with Anthony Richardson on it, which is in the late fifth round or so. There is a lull early where I think the biggest difference can be at quarterback. Once Isaiah Pacheco's off the board and I'm at the late 3rd, maybe I'm near the 3-4 turn, Jalen Hurts looks like a pretty good value there, right? Because the guys who are being drafted around that spot are Jalen Waddle, Michael Pittman, Patrick Mahomes, Malik Neighbors, Lamar Jackson, Rashad White, CJ Stroud. The guy who stands out among that group is Jalen Hurts. Like, is there anybody you prefer over Hurts among that group?
No, not even close. Okay. And you're looking at that whole group of players that you said, like, all the quarterbaks are more appealing to me, in my opinion.
Right.
But
yeah, opposed to like the positional guys. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Similar thing with Anthony Richardson a little bit later, right? Like late 5th round. The guys going around him, Keenan Allen, Amari Cooper, who obviously we talked about, we do like grabbing here, right? So based on what your strategy is, maybe you go Cooper instead. But Aaron Jones, George Kittle, James Conner, Christian Kirk, Rome Odunze, like Richardson easily stands out here as well. He led all quarterbacks pretty significantly in fantasy points per dropback, and as we know, based on Ryan Heath's work on fantasypoints.com, that, besides fantasy points per game the year before, fantasy points per dropback is the second leading indicator of future fantasy points. So that's why I'm willing to grab him there. The upside is immense. What about you? Are you looking at any of these other guys? Like if you had to choose, I know you're big on Amari Cooper. Like in most drafts, let's say you don't have a quarterback by this point, would you rather get Cooper and then take a quarterback later, or are you still going A-Rich?
I think just because I'm so high on Anthony Richardson, also I'd probably go with Anthony Richardson, assuming I don't have a quarterback at that point. If I have a quarterback at that point, then I'm probably going to Amari Cooper. But you'd have to
Who's
pick one of the top guys.
so?
Obviously, being
Let's say you don't. Let's say you go Amari Cooper here. Who would be the next quarterback that you're considering?
it would be between I think two, and they're going I think back to back in sleeper ADP right now, and it's Kyler Murray and Jordan Love. Both of them, I like both of them. I think Kyler Murray more for me. I think he has a higher rushing upside. I think his offense is very good. We it wasn't very good last season, but you look at the weapons that he has. He has Marvin Harrison now. Zay Jones is pretty good. He's going to see the field. You have Michael Wilson. You also have Trey McBride in the receiving game. Then you have James Conner, Trey Benson in the backfield. Like, this
Did
is a good
you
offense.
forget Greg Dortch? How
Oh my
dare
God.
you?
What am I talking about?
How
Yeah, this
dare
is
you?
the small. This is a certified small offense, and I forgot Greg Dortch. What am I talking about? No, Loki. He wasn't bad as a pinch starter last season. He just kind of came up
Yeah,
out of nowhere. I think he had one or two 20-point games. So
yeah.
I don't want to just completely write him off, but I also want to make the point that this is not a bad offense. You can look at Jordan Love and be like, yeah, he's stacked. He has depth all over the place. So maybe Kyler Murray's offense a little bit more top heavy. If you lose one of his weapons, I'd be less bullish about it. But if they go into the year healthy, like Kyler Murray, I think he can be huge. Remember what he was doing back before he had the first injury. He was a top 3 quarterback. Like, don't lose sight of that. I think at this price right now, he's going to be a year removed now fully from that injury. I don't have any problems with Kyler Murray.
I'm with you, man. I'm looking at him big time as a QB9 off the board. Usually passing on Dak Prescott. One of the things with Dak Prescott, man, what if he loses CeeDee Lamb? I don't want to cast a
It's a
bad omen
scary
here, but
thought. Right.
he literally has nobody. I mean, we talked about Jake Ferguson, but come on,
He
he will
can't
have
sustain on
nobody,
that.
and it's going to be bad. So I find myself passing on Dak. If Dak was going a little bit later, I think he would definitely be on my list. But the fact that he's going before Kyler, I would take Kyler there. I like Jordan Love as well. You know, the thing is, where Dak Prescott's going, you have Chris Godwin, Hollywood Brown, Calvin Ridley, all going in that range, right? So, that's the round of the wide receivers. I'm going there. Kyler's going around Najee, Tony Pollard, Raheem Mostert, Zamir White. I mentioned Jordan Love, David Njoku. Obviously, I like Raheem Mostert, but I think Kyler Murray is a very more solid, solid pick, for the season. So, I like grabbing my QB1 here if I didn't grab one already. You mentioned how you feel about Jordan Love. I feel very similarly. He has depth everywhere, right? When his wide receivers get hurt, okay, boom, next man up, right? He even talk about Bo Melton, right? Like he could potentially step up and do his thing. Tight end, obviously, he has two very good tight ends, both of them drafted last year. Tucker Kraft came in and performed serviceably last year when Luke Musgrave got hurt. And obviously the running back position, he has Marshawn Lloyd waiting in the wings behind Josh Jacobs. So there's a lot going on there. Solid offensive line, really good play caller. I'm all about it, right? Now, once these quarterbacks are off the board, I have my eye on yet another rushing quarterback. And if you want to know more about why rushing quarterback, go check out the post from July 15th, Monday, July 15th on the Upper Hand Fantasy Instagram page. But Jaden Daniels in the 10th round in a one quarterback league, I'm perfectly fine grabbing him as my QB1 because he has top 5 upside as a rookie because of how much he'll be rushing, okay? His scrambling rate was one of the highest among college quarterbacks, among the higher-end college quarterbacks last year. I understand if you rather grab guys like Brock Purdy or Jared Goff. I think Purdy has more upside between the two. But man, I think grabbing that rushing quarterback is important. There's some upside there. Cliff Kingsbury, remember what he was able to do with Kyler Murray in Arizona when he drafted him. There's some upside there. But yeah. So how do you feel about Jane Daniels? Would you be cool with him being your QB1 going into the year?
At his price, yeah. And his price is actually super inflated right now compared to what it was earlier in the offseason. He's been one of the highest movers.
Right.
He's up over is he up over Caleb Williams? Not okay. He's up over
Yes.
Caleb Williams.
Is he?
I think on Underdog. He
Okay.
is. But I think on Sleeper, I'm looking at it right now. He's 4 spots below Caleb Williams, which again, just to make the point, the ADP is drastically different from platform to platform. I'm pulling it up right now just to see because I gotta know if Caleb Williams is going before or after. Let me see. Jaden Daniels, yeah. So on Sleeper, Caleb Williams is a QB 11. Jaden Daniels is a QB 15. On underdog, Jaden Daniels is a QB 11. Caleb Williams is a QB 13. So there you go. Huge difference in value. So if Caleb Williams is not Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels is a QB 11 on underdog, I'm a little bit maybe leery, much more leery than I am of Jaden Daniels on sleeper at QB 15. But the upside is there. I don't have a problem taking him at either of those spots. I feel much better about it on sleeper because you can't really go wrong at that point. But the upside is there. I think you laid it out pretty perfectly. The rushing ability, we know Cliff Kingsbury has worked with the rushing quarterback before. I don't have an issue with Jaden Daniels, and he's in a pretty good offense. Commanders have been missing a quarterback for a long time. The gripe has always been about the quarterback with Terry McLaurin. I think this is the first quarterback that has a shot to really make him relevant and then also boost the entire offense overall.
Yeah, and the Commanders' offensive game plan and like the play calling and stuff, the play design was just a little weird last year. So, and now I can understand why. Yeah, no, it's not even just Sam Howell. Actually, I think overperformed in that situation. Personally, I think he did a decent job, but the play calling, all that, not amazing. Now, I mentioned Brock Purdy, I mentioned Jared Goff, right? Once all these guys that I mentioned are off the board, just grab someone. It doesn't matter. Like Kirk Cousins might have some upside despite coming off the Achilles injury, but like at this point, grab your QB1 and just like do your thing. Like in the first, you can get a quarterback in the 12th, 13th, 14th round and be fine. Okay, low end QB1, high end QB2, it doesn't really make that much of a difference. Okay. If you play in leagues with kickers and defenses, which I don't, but if you do, grab them with your last 2 picks. And if you're drafting a few weeks before the regular season, I wouldn't draft either. Okay, just draft other running backs and wide receivers with upside in case something happens, right? Between the time you draft and before week 1, because you never know. An injury can open up opportunity, right? Increase their value. They can be hyped up in camp and preseason, and they become hotter commodities. And then you might decide to drop someone else instead for your kicker and your defense for week 1. And then you stream these positions at the very least. Okay. That's going to pretty much do it for this episode, guys. I hope this helps. We're going to have a lot more content, around this type of things, going into a little more detail, with these positions, some sleepers, breakout guys, all of that coming on this channel. On the Upper Hand Fantasy Podcast. Make sure to check out our 2024 season-long draft kit, upperhandfantasy.com. Use code UPPERHAND on Underdog to start drafting and winning some money. And please, if you could subscribe to the podcast on your podcast app, subscribe on YouTube, like the video on YouTube. I would really, really appreciate it. Appreciate you guys. Thank you for listening, and we'll be back soon. Peace!